What if being born with a billion-dollar fortune was a curse? This is the story of a man who escaped his golden cage, leaving everything behind to chase an impossible dream in a country where he barely spoke the language. To follow his incredible journey and see if he succeeds, make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss a single chapter. Today, we have a story about dreams, about courage, and about breaking free from the life that others expect you to live. Many people are born into a life full of comfort and luxury. But what happens if that is not what they truly want? What if they have a completely different dream in their heart? We are going to follow the journey of a young man who seemed to have everything: wealth, power, and comfort. But he was not happy. He had a dream that his family did not support, a dream that was completely different from their plans. So he made a very brave choice. He decided to leave everything behind him and chase his own destiny. Please stay with us until the end, because this story is a powerful reminder to never give up on your own dreams. It might just inspire you. So let's begin. Let's listen to Leo's story in his own words. My name is Leo Garcia. I am 25 years old, and I am from the beautiful city of Madrid in Spain. If you looked at my life from the outside, you would probably think I am the luckiest person in the world. My father is one of the richest businessmen in all of Spain. My family owns luxury hotels, very expensive restaurants, and high-end fashion stores. I grew up in a huge mansion with a garden that stretched for acres. We had servants who would bring me anything I wanted. Sometimes, even before I had to ask. I drive a brand new Ferrari. I wear custom-made Italian suits, and I own watches that cost more than what most people earn in an entire year. But I will tell you a secret. I hated that life. Ever since I was a small child, my parents had already planned my entire future. They sent me to the best business school in the country, and they always told me the same thing. Leo, my father would say, one day all of this will be yours. You will take over the family business. You do not need to worry about anything. You were born rich, and you will die rich. But these words never made me happy. They felt heavy, like a cage made of gold. I never wanted this life. I did not care about money, or expensive shoes, or fancy parties. I had a different dream. I wanted to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a lawyer who fights for justice and for truth. In college, my friends would always tell me, "You are so lucky, Leo. You have everything." But inside, I just felt empty. What is the point of having everything if you do not have happiness? One evening, I finally gathered all of my courage to tell my parents the truth. We were all sitting in the grand dining hall. We were eating our dinner under a crystal chandelier that cost millions of dollars. The air was quiet and formal, as it always was. I put down my fork, looked directly at my father, and said, "Father, I don't want to run the business. I want to be a lawyer." A heavy silence fell over the table. My mother gasped and dropped her spoon on her plate. My father just stared at me, his eyes wide, as if I had just told him I had betrayed our entire family. "A lawyer," he finally said, and he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Leo, why would you work so hard for a job that pays less than what our family makes in a single day?" I tried to explain my feelings. "Because it's my dream," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want to fight for justice. I want to do something meaningful with my life." But he slammed his hand down on the table, and the plates and glasses jumped. "No, Leo," he said, his voice loud and angry. "You will not waste your life. You will run our business, and that is final." My mother tried to calm him down, but he would not listen. My father truly believed that money was everything. That night, I lay in my enormous, comfortable bed, just staring up at the dark ceiling. I kept thinking, will I spend my entire life living someone else's dream? The next day, I felt completely lost. I walked alone through the busy streets of Madrid, not really going anywhere. My feet, almost by themselves, led me to a small, quiet cafe. I ordered a coffee and sat at a little table, deep in my thoughts. An old man was sitting at the table next to mine. He was watching me with kind eyes and a wise, gentle face. "You look troubled, young man," he said in a soft voice. I sighed. I felt like I could talk to him. "I have everything, so," I told him, "but I feel like I have nothing. My parents want me to take over their business, but I want to be a lawyer." The old man nodded slowly. He took a sip of his own coffee, looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something that changed my life forever. "In life," he said, "you cannot wait for someone to save you, not even your own parents. They will always tell you what they believe is best, of course, but they cannot live your dream for you. If you wait for permission, you will wait forever." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, everything was clear. At that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I went home. I walked through the big, empty mansion, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a prison. It just felt like a place I was leaving. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to my parents. My hand was steady as I wrote, "I love you, but I cannot live a life that is not mine. I must chase my dream, even if it means leaving everything behind." I left the letter on my father's desk. Then I went to my room and packed a small suitcase. I had about $50,000 in cash from my personal savings. It was nothing compared to the wealth I was used to, but it was everything I needed to start a new life. I booked a one-way flight to Sydney, Australia. Why Australia? Because to become a lawyer there, you must speak perfect English. And I knew that if I wanted to survive and succeed, I had to become the best version of myself. At the airport, as I handed my passport to the officer, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. This was it. For the very first time in my life, I was making a decision completely for myself. As the plane took off into the night sky, I looked out the window at the lights of Madrid disappearing below. I whispered to myself, "Goodbye, old life. Hello, new destiny." And what a brave decision that was, to leave a world of comfort for a world of unknowns. I have a question for all of you. What would you do in Leo's situation? Have you ever had to choose between what your family wanted for you and what your own heart was telling you to do? It's a very difficult choice. I would love to read your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Now let's continue with Leo's journey. The plane landed at Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport early in the morning. The moment I stepped out of the airport doors, a warm breeze hit my face. The air smelled different here. It was fresh, a little salty from the ocean, and it seemed full of possibilities. I had arrived in Australia, a country I had only ever seen in movies. I felt so excited, but I also felt terrified. I was in a new country, all alone, without my family's support. I had money in my pocket, yes, but I knew it would not last forever. As I walked through the busy airport, I saw signs in English everywhere. Baggage claim, immigration, customs exit. I could read them, of course, but speaking English in a real conversation was a very different challenge. At the immigration desk, a serious-looking officer looked at my passport. "Purpose of visit?" he asked, his voice flat. I froze for a second. I knew the words in my head, but my tongue felt heavy and clumsy. I had studied English for years in a classroom in Spain, but real-life conversation was much, much harder. I come for study law," I said, struggling to get the words out. They sounded wrong to my own ears. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You mean you are here to study law?" I nodded my head, quickly feeling my face get warm. Yes, to study law." He stamped my passport and waved me through, but the feeling of embarrassment stayed with me. If I wanted to be a lawyer in Australia, I needed to speak fluent, confident English. This was my first test, and I felt like I had failed. I took a taxi from the airport. The driver was a friendly Australian man, and his accent was fast and strong. "G'day, mate. Where you headin'?" he asked with a big smile. I just stared at him confused. "Where I going?" I repeated slowly. He laughed a friendly laugh. "Yeah, mate. Where you going?" I showed him the address on my phone. As we drove, I looked out the window. Sydney was beautiful. There were tall, modern buildings, the sky was a bright blue, and the streets were so clean. People were walking around in shorts and t-shirts, which was very different from Spain, where people often dressed more formally. In the distance, I saw a famous bridge and a huge white building with a unique shape. I had seen it in pictures, but now it was real. "That's the Sydney Opera House," the driver said, noticing my gaze. "Opera?" I repeated, trying to understand. "Yeah, mate. Famous for concerts, theater, all that stuff," he explained. I nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and loneliness. I wanted to talk more with him, to ask questions, but I didn't know enough English. I had booked a cheap Airbnb for my first few weeks. It was a small one-bedroom apartment in a suburb called Newtown. The room was very simple, just a small bed, a desk, a tiny kitchen, and a window with a view of the street below. It was nothing like my huge, luxurious mansion back in Spain, but as I stood there in that simple room, I felt a sense of peace. It was mine. I sat down on the pee and the reality of my situation washed over me. I felt both free and very scared. "I did it," I whispered to myself. I left everything behind. But now came the hardest part, learning English, finding a job, and somehow becoming a lawyer in a country where absolutely no one knew me. The first few weeks were very, very difficult. I remember going to a cafe to order a coffee, and I couldn't understand what the barista was asking me. One night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, a wave of doubt came over me. I thought, if I don't fix this English problem, I will fail. Everything will be for nothing. So right then and there, I made a strict plan for myself, a mission to master English. First, I started listening to Australian English every single day. I listened to Australian news podcasts and movies. Every morning, I would play the ABC News on my phone while I made breakfast. At first, I only understood maybe 30% of it, but I kept listening day after day. After 2 months, I could understand almost everything. Second, I forced myself to speak with Australians every day. I started small conversations in supermarkets, coffee shops, and parks. I joined an English conversation club where people from different countries could practice speaking English together. I made one important rule for myself: no speaking Spanish, only English. At first, I made a lot of mistakes, but I found that most Australians were very kind and patient with me. Third, I read and wrote every day. I read local newspapers, law books I found at a second-hand store, and novels. Every night I wrote in a journal about my day. Slowly, my grammar started to improve, and I noticed something amazing happening. I was starting to think in English instead of thinking in Spanish, and then translating. One of the best techniques I learned was called shadowing. This is where you repeat what a native speaker says exactly as they say it. I would play an English podcast, pause it after every sentence, and then repeat the sentence, trying to copy the accent and rhythm perfectly. This exercise was incredibly helpful. It made me sound more natural and feel more confident. After 3 months, my savings were getting low. I needed a job. I walked into a busy restaurant and asked to see the manager. "Do you need any workers?" I asked him. He looked me up and down and said, "Can you carry plates?" "Yes," I said. "Okay, trial shift tomorrow." And just like that, I got my first job as a waiter. At first it was very hard. I had to understand complicated food orders, speak clearly to customers, and work very fast. My manager would say, "Table 5 wants a medium rare steak with a side of chips." And I would write down, "Table 5, meat, chips." My manager laughed and said, "Leo, write it properly." But this job became my greatest English teacher. Every day I talked to hundreds of people. I learned new words, new phrases, and even some Australian slang. After 6 months, my English was so much better. I could have normal conversations. I could understand some legal terms I read in books, and I felt much more confident. One night after my shift, I looked up law schools in Sydney. To become a lawyer in Australia, I learned that I had to do 3 things first. Pass a difficult English test called IELTS. Second, complete an Australian law degree. And third, JASIS, the final bar exam. It was a long journey, but I was ready. I applied to the University of Sydney Law School, and a few months later, I received the acceptance letter. Standing in front of the beautiful old university building, I whispered to myself, "This is my dream, and I will make it real." He has achieved his first big goal. But we all know that getting into university is just the beginning of the real challenge. The next part of Leo's journey is full of new difficulties. If you want to find out how he survives the challenges of law school, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter of his incredible story. The day I got accepted into Sydney Law School, I felt like I was on top of the world. I had done it. I had proven to myself that the first part of my dream was possible, but the real challenge had just begun. I walked into the huge university building for my first day. Students were everywhere, talking, laughing, reading big, heavy books, and typing quickly on their laptops. Everyone looked so smart, so confident, and so focused. I found my classroom and sat down. The professor started speaking. "Today," he said, "we will discuss tort law and the importance of precedents in common law systems." I froze. I understood the individual words, but my brain was too slow to process the meaning of the long, complex sentences. The students around me were already taking notes quickly, but I could only write down a few words here and there. I felt stupid. I felt like an outsider. How will I ever survive this? I thought to myself. The first few weeks were very tough. The legal terms were difficult, like a new language inside of a new language. The professors spoke very fast, and the other students all seemed to have much better English than me. One night after a long, difficult class, I sat all alone in the university library. The library was quiet, and I was surrounded by thousands of books. I put my head down on the hard table, and I almost cried. Maybe I made a mistake, I thought. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I should just go back home to Spain. But then I remembered everything I had already overcome. I remembered leaving my rich, comfortable life. I remembered working hard as a waiter. I remembered the pride I felt when I started to master English. I didn't come this far only to give up now, I told myself, sitting up straight. I knew I had to work 10 times harder than the other students. So I created a new, even stricter plan for myself. I started studying 10 hours a day. I would wake up at 5 a.m. and start reading. I read all the law books slowly and very carefully. I wrote down every new word and its meaning in a special notebook. I also watched YouTube videos that explained difficult legal topics in simple English. I also focused on speaking English like a native. I still had my Spanish accent, and I knew that sometimes people had trouble understanding me. So I practiced shadowing for 2 hours every single day. I would listen to recordings of law lectures and repeat every sentence. I practiced speaking in front of a mirror to improve my pronunciation. I even recorded my own voice and listened back to it so I could find my mistakes. After 3 months of this intense practice, my English was much better. Finally, I knew I needed to learn from the best. I found the top students in my class, the ones who always knew the answers. I became friends with them. I humbly asked them how they studied. I joined their study groups. I practiced debating legal cases with them. At first, I lost every single debate, but after 6 months, I started winning. One day, my professor made an announcement. Next month, he said, you will all participate in a mock trial. You will argue a real case in front of a real judge. I felt a mix of excitement and fear. This was my first real chance to prove myself. For the next few weeks, I prepared day and night. I read the case hundreds of times. I memorized all of my arguments. I practiced my speaking until the words felt like my own. Finally, the day of the mock trial came. I stood in the courtroom wearing a suit. My hands were shaking. The judge, a real judge with a kind but serious face, looked at me and said, "Mr. Garcia, you may begin your argument." I took a deep breath. I looked at the judge, and I began to speak. And the words came out. They were clear. They were strong. They were confident. For 10 minutes, I presented my case. I spoke about justice, about the law, and about the facts. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge nodded his head slowly. "Very well argued, Mr. Garcia," he said. In that moment, I felt tears come to my eyes. I had done it. I had gone from a boy who could barely order a coffee in English to a law student who could argue a case in front of a real judge. After 4 long years of hard work, I passed my final exams. I walked across the big stage at graduation and received my law degree. As I held my diploma in my hand, I thought about my journey. The rich boy who had everything but was not happy. The waiter who struggled with English. The student who had to work harder than anyone else. And now, I was a lawyer in Australia. I had proven to myself and to the world that no dream is impossible if you are willing to fight for it. If you have a dream, please don't wait for someone else to support you. Your parents might not understand your dreams. Your friends might think you are crazy. Society might tell you that you can't do it. But in the end, it's your life. And if you work harder than everyone else, you can achieve anything. This was my story. Now I have a question for you. What will your story be? I was just a rich boy from Spain. I had money, cars, and expensive clothes, but I wasn't happy. I left everything behind to follow my own path. I worked as a waiter. I struggled with a new language, and I fought through very difficult times. And in the end, I made it. If I can do it, so can you. No dream is too big. No goal is impossible. All you need is courage, hard work, and the belief that you can change your life. So please don't waste your time waiting. Start now. Your dream is waiting for you. And when you finally achieve it, the world will look at you in amazement and say, "How did you do it?" And you will smile and say, "Because I never gave up." And that's where Leo's story comes to an end. What a journey that was, from a life of unhappy luxury to a life of meaningful, hard work. I am so curious to hear what you all think about it. What were your final thoughts on Leo's decisions? Do you have any lingering questions about his father or about his struggles in law school? Please leave all of your opinions, your feelings, and your questions in the comments below. I truly love reading them and building this wonderful community conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in our next story.